can you speak to one of the biggest problems within the industry, of course, is the fact that it is a for-profit business. And even though it's very hard to prove, there are a lot of doctors, again, most doctors, believe it or not, are actually for a universal healthcare system. But there are the ones that benefit mightily from having very cozy relationships with the big pharma industry. So if you can talk about where the biggest issues lie regarding the roadblocks with CalCare. And there's even been a proposal to potentially try to do a ballot initiative in California, which could be interesting. So how do you see that potentially unfolding, and where do you see the biggest roadblocks as of right now?
Well, it's interesting because people talk about other countries and Germany, Switzerland, they'll say, oh, they have private and public, but it's heavily regulated. So the person you talk to from UK saying, oh, there's also private, but it's so heavily regulated, just like our car insurance is heavily regulated. We're not paying $2,000 this year, and then 5 years from now paying $10,000, for car insurance, because it's a very regulated industry. And so that being said, when we have made efforts to try to do cost controls and cost containment, price controls. And we had a ballot initiative just on pharmaceuticals, and the pharmaceutical industry spent over $100 million to defeat it. And so at the end of the day, if someone says to me, oh, well, why don't you do something like a hybrid or what have you? The problem is that we're so infested in this profit taking in our industry that there's no real way for us to ever negotiate some opportunity to have these insurance agents, insurance companies, and hospitals as good actors. They're just never going to be. And so that's why we've got to go for a system like CalCare that is just going to go straight to a single payer system, because our system is so corrupted. So we have to completely cut out the cancer, so to speak, right? And inevitably, look, first of all, even with my bill, AB 1400 was the policy piece. We've had single payer introduced several times over the last 20 plus years. I'm the first legislator to ever introduce a funding mechanism. That was our ACA 11. That was to go to the voters, because ultimately something of this nature, you've got to get voter buy-in, because it's such a transformational change. And the challenge that's going to exist going to the voters is the industry. If they spend $100 million just on pharmaceuticals, they'll spend as much as $500 million trying to keep us from getting a single payer system. But that's where I tell people, hey, I don't care if polling tells me 70, 80% want it. You now have to show up to the ballot box and actually show that you're willing to fight against this industry and say, yes, this is what we want. So even with the method, the way we were doing it and having a policy bill, we still also have an ACA, a constitutional amendment to go to the voters, because not only do we have to have a funding mechanism, which is still far less than what we pay now anyway, but we also have constitutional issues that have to be dealt with that we need to go to the voters for. And so ultimately, if we can't get a policy bill through, absolutely, maybe we just got to go to the voters for all of it and just say, you know what, we're doing all of it with the voters because we just can't get this through the legislature. I'm still holding out hope we can do it through the legislature by getting a policy piece through and getting a constitutional amendment to the ballot. If we can do that, that would be the ideal scenario. And so I'm still holding out hope that we're going to be able to do that.
At what point did you realize that this session, it wasn't going to happen? Like you at some point you were optimistic, like, okay, we can do this. I feel it. And then something must have happened, or several things must have happened where you realized, yeah, I shouldn't do this now.
Well, it happened very quickly. The thing is, January 31st was literally our deadline that we had to get the policy bill through the assembly. So it was the last 24 to 48 hours, because what had been happening was, because it was the second year of a two-year session, but the way that works is that bills have to move very quickly when it comes to January. So we only had a couple weeks to get it through two committees and then get it out the floor of the assembly. We got it through the first committee. We got it through the second committee, but that means we only had a handful of days to get it off the floor of the assembly. And so all the while, I'm having conversations with my colleagues. I'm meeting with them. I had set aside 30, 40 hours of time to meet with them. And we were trying to get, we're counting our votes. Like, how many yes votes do we have? We had gotten as high as 28, and then we just stalled. And it wasn't until the last 24 hours that more and more colleagues were getting back to me saying they weren't there yet, or they weren't going to vote for it. And that's where, so that's why it appeared understandably to the public so rushed. Like, wait a second, I thought this was going to a vote, and all of a sudden it's dead. And the reason why that we couldn't get any more movement beyond, if we had taken it to a vote, maybe we would have gotten to 28, 29, 30, maybe 31, but we needed a 41. And I personally think it would have been devastating to the effort if we had taken it up for a vote and fallen that dramatically short. And especially because the two things, one I mentioned earlier, we are going to have some more single-payer friendly legislators next year, but we're not going to have enough to get those extra 10, 11, 12 votes. We're still going to need a half a dozen or maybe even more of the incumbent colleagues. And so given that, I thought it was better to hold it and have the opportunity to get more single-payer friendly legislators and have more time to get those 4, 5, 6, 7 more that are incumbent legislators on board. And so that's what the hope is.
Yeah. Is there a way? I mean, I know you know who those people are, but I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a mass campaign in those districts of those people for their constituents to demand it, because they're not going to just do it for fun. So like, is there a way, like, do you put out that information? Like, these are the legislators that are holding us up. If you live in these districts, you should really be out there, speaking your mind.
Absolutely. And so the way that it would work ideally is that once we know who the new slate of legislators are, a lot of the folks are leaving. Then we know we can do a more kind of accurate sense of where we are. And then working with the nurses, working with other folks that are allies, I mean, they do a great job on the ground, is that you go on the ground of those districts and you run a positive campaign to try to get them there. And I think that's the best case scenario we have. Ultimately, we put it up to a vote because next time around, it's going to go to a vote, because we're going to have more votes. And then that way, if there's 4, 5, 6 holdouts, their electorate, their constituents are going to know that. But the reality is that, look, I had the same vote count as the nurses. We were doing it together. They know exactly who was there and who wasn't. So they can organize in those districts to make sure that next time around they're there. And then I do my job, which is over the next several months, work in those districts to get those colleagues on board well in advance of a vote.
Right.
I would ask if, people have suggested doing a ballot initiative. Could you see the value of potentially doing both, continuing on the course that you're on, and then potentially getting, let's say the Bernie movement, if you will, that is substantially big in California, pushing for a ballot initiative for universal health care? Do you think that in conjunction with what you're doing could be of added value to trying to get this thing over the finish line?
I think that it absolutely could be. I think we are on the cusp of getting a policy bill through, certainly through the Assembly to the Senate. And I think if we weren't, let's say we were at 28, 20, 30 votes and the legislature wasn't turning over much next year, that would have given me all the incentive to take it up for a vote, because nothing is going to change. Because we're at this particular year, going into next year, we had the opportunity to have a different outcome. That's where I feel we can get a policy bill forward. And if we can get the constitutional amendment to the voters, then it just needs to be passed at 50% plus one. And that's what the difference is between going straight to a ballot initiative on taxation where it may need 2/3 vote. I'm trying to get it to the voters where we only need 50% plus one to make it that much easier for the Bernie movement, single payer movement, nurses, Democratic Socialists, Democratic Party, Progressive Democrat, and the Progressive Caucus Democratic Party to have now a mission ahead. Because and one last thing I want to mention on this one, I'm monopolized all the time, but by getting a policy bill passed, that then allows the administration to apply for waivers. We cannot apply for waivers until there's legislative authority. And when I met with the administration, very clearly they said that means a bill has to be passed, but it just has to be a policy bill. The financing does not have to be determined at the same time. That's the reason why I was doing it in this order. There is a kind of a rhyme to the reason and a rhythm to this chaos of why it was being done that certain way.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.